Welcome everybody to today's Information City Lectures. My name is Kate Williams. I'm the co-convener of the lecture series 7 years ago, I believe it was. And we, every now and then, well, at least for 1 week of every series, we need to go back to look at the infrastructure on which the Information City runs. And for that reason, we have our two speakers here today to speak about something which has been unfolding in the area for 5 or 6 years. So I want to welcome you all, and I want to ask Liz Margo, the Informatics student here at CITES, to introduce herself.
Great, sounds good. So first up, we have Mike Smeltzer. And Michael K. Smeltzer recently retired from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign as the Director of Networking and the Director of Community Projects at CITES. He was the principal investigator and behind the Urbana-Champaign Big Broadband UC2B Consortium, a $29.4 million BTOP project, which was funded in March of 2009 and completed earlier this year. Before rejoining the university in 2005, Mike was a local operations manager for McLeod USA, where he helped design and manage a $7 million fiber project in the UIUC campus area. He has also been a faculty member in the university's College of Communications and Media, at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois, and at the University High School in Urbana, Illinois. He was formerly a photojournalist with the United Press International, UPI, a cinematographer and a television news anchor with WCIA-TV, and served as a publisher and general manager of the Daily Illini and the WPGU-FM. While Mike likes to believe that a circuitous career path displays a deep capacity for lifelong learning, his wife of more than 40 years believes he just cannot keep a job. So that's Mike, and then our other speaker today is Levi Dinkla, and he has worked for many years at ITV3 and Family Video. He is the point person for ITV3's assumption of the fiber operations of UC2B. Before that, he focused in the real estate sector for Family Video and other areas, other people across the Midwest. So let's give a round of applause for our speakers today.
Well, good morning. Kate and I were just figuring that this is the 6th time we've done this because the UC2B project actually started in 2009. But that really wasn't the beginning of the broadband efforts here in Champaign-Urbana. So I'm going to take you on a brief historical tour. Back in the 90s, NCSA has been here since then, and the web browser was developed at the university, and the head of NCSA was a guy named Larry Smar, and he went to the community and said, hey, this thing called the internet's coming, and perhaps there's an opportunity here for local businesses to take advantage of it. So the Chamber of Commerce said, yeah, that seems like a good idea, put together some committees, which chambers tend to do, and we worked to deal with a local cable company to put in the very early cable modems. They were so early that you got your data downstream through the cable line, but you actually used the telephone line and a modem to send data back out. So it was great for receiving data, not so good for sending data. We later worked with Emeritus on an ISDN project, which was a little faster, a little more reliable. And then in 1999, the university, where I wasn't working at the time, put out an RFP asking private companies to come up with a plan for connecting off-campus housing. Fraternities, sororities, certified student housing, apartment buildings, because really only about 25% of UI students live on campus in university-owned housing. I'm going to guess most of you live in apartments. Fair guess? And what was happening in 1999 was the students that lived in dormitories had good internet connectivity. We wired them good by their standards, not so good by today's standards, but a long time ago. But as soon as students moved out into apartments or certified student housing, they had nothing. And since 1999, the university has understood that we're moving towards a blended learning model. The days of going to class Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sitting through a lecture are numbered. If the university could move some of its classes to Monday, Wednesday, and then have you do some on the internet on Friday, that would free up 33% of their classrooms for an extra day. We wouldn't need to build so many buildings and to accommodate more students. So it's in the university's financial best interest, and it's probably in your best interest as students to get to more of a blended learning model, but we can't do that until your professor has a pretty good reason to believe that you're going to have access to media-rich educational materials online no matter where you live. You don't have to live in the dorms, you don't have to live here or there. that every single student of the university, where they live in Champaign-Urbana, is going to have equal access to high bandwidth connections back to the university. So the university did that. A company I worked for at the time called McLeod USA responded, and we ended up building fiber in the Champaign part of campus. As an experiment, we ended up building a technology called ADSL in the Urbana part of campus. And that worked out fairly well. Back in 1977, 97, I'm lying here. I had been working through some of this and thought that we ought to have a community broadband project and to build what we eventually ended up building for UCB. But in 1997, we called it CUNet 2000 because at the time I thought it would only take 3 years to do it. Well, here we are 17 years later, we finally got it done. So I had kind of underestimated the time span. But in 2008, there was a white paper published by an organization called EDUCAUSE, which this university belongs to. And it basically said, or projected, that it would take $200 billion to connect every home in America to fiber. You can debate whether that number is a right number or not, but it got a lot of people's attention. One of the people who read that white paper was then Senator Obama. And when he became president, he immediately added broadband funding to his stimulus package, which came out shortly after he was elected. We heard about that. I was in Washington right before his inauguration to kind of hear what was being proposed. And on the day that he signed the stimulus legislation, we had a DC consultant who specializes in broadband here in town at the I-Hotel. We had about 150, 200 people in the room to talk about how we might leverage this coming funding opportunity from the federal government. And that eventually turned into UCB. The state also came up with a plan because the federal program required a 20% match. And what we thought we wanted to do here was going to be roughly $35 million, which meant we needed to come up with $7 million. Now, I'm a reasonable salesman, but we had 45 days, and my ability to sell people investing $7 million locally in this was somewhat limited. But fortunately, the state came along and said, we will provide 10% of your local match, or half of your local match, 10% of the total budget, if you get funded. Well, we had to go through a competitive process with the state of Illinois to do that. We did that, and we were guaranteed our funding. And eventually, we ended up getting $29.4 million. And the difference in that is that there were 2 other projects that we had proposed. Kate and Abdul were involved in the other 2. And if you read the official title of our project, the infrastructure project, it's called the Urbana-Champaign Big Broadband Underground Project, because that's where all the fiber is. Whereas the 2 projects that Kate and Abdul proposed were above ground. They were the people-oriented projects. One was for public computing centers, one was for sustainable broadband adoption, training, computers for low-income families, community help desk, those kinds of things. Unfortunately, those 2 projects were not funded. There were different buckets of money within this program, and we tried in round 1, we tried in round 2, and neither time were those programs funded. But those needs still exist, and I think a lot of what this class will be talking about over the course of the semester will be dealing with some of those needs that are all there. I haven't been keeping up with my slides, so I'm a bad person. Okay, groundbreaking. We got funded, we hired contractors, got our stuff together. It took over a year just to get organized once we were funded. But we had contractors and we broke ground in September of 2011. What did we build out of all this? 7 fiber optic rings, and the big maps you have there kind of show you where those rings go. Those connect more than 255 local community anchor institutions. What is a community anchor institution? Well, the federal government had its own definition for what that was. Schools, libraries, public safety facilities, medical facilities, senior living centers, public computing centers, and that was kind of it. We looked at the legislation that Congress passed, and Congress spent a lot of time talking about vulnerable populations. And they said the money this should help serving vulnerable populations. So we kind of expanded the definition of what is a community anchor institution to include the agencies that work with vulnerable populations. Very young kids are vulnerable, so we did Head Start. Very old people are vulnerable, so we did the senior living centers. Disabled people are vulnerable, so we did the DSC facility in town. Homeless people are vulnerable, so we did some of the shelters in town. And we looked at it that way, and that gave us a lot greater numbers to work with. But it also kind of got us deeper into the fabric of the community, which we think ended up being a good thing. So we had the rings doing the anchor institutions, but we also, about half of the project was building fiber to the home. Typically, these projects did one or the other. We tried to do both, and we were the only project of any size that was funded that did both. So we had to go door to door, figuring out where we were going to build fiber to the home, and the federal government had a formula for doing that. And we had to knock on doors, and with any given census block group, which is how all federal funding gets handed out, we had to show that less than 41% of the people that lived there had broadband at the time. And we did that, and there were some areas that we were pretty sure were going to qualify because there's not a direct correlation, but there's a pretty good correlation between income and broadband adoption. And typically lower income families don't have broadband and higher income families do. Not all the areas, and they're shaded yellow on the maps you have there, those are the areas that got the fiber to the home. And not all of those would be described as low-income areas, but probably most of them are. There were also some low-income areas that didn't qualify. And in a couple of cases, some of you may live in these apartments, so like on North Lincoln Avenue, there's a couple of really big apartment complexes out towards the interstate for students. All the students that live in those apartments have internet, and they have for years. So 500 apartments here and 250 low-income homes behind ended up being in the same census block group. So I had 100% penetration here. There was no way that those low-income homes that were right behind them were ever going to qualify given those numbers. So we certainly didn't get all of the low-income areas, but we got a fair number. So look at the rings in a very simplistic way. That's what they look like. The university was very cooperative in this, and we were able to establish cores for the network at 2 of the university communications nodes on campus. So all of the rings flow through Champaign-Urbana, but they always come back to these 2 places. I can't tell you where they are. I'd have to shoot you. But they're on campus. We used to have signs on the door that said what they were, but since Homeland Security and all that has gotten to be a big thing, they're now a big secret where they are. But they're on campus. And these fiber rings converge there. So by having the core equipment there and by building the rings, that allows us to offer a fairly redundant, robust service out in the field. Not all of our customers are hooked up that way, but many of the nodes and the equipment we have in the field, and some businesses are hooked up that way. One of the big enemies of fiber network is it gets cut. Somebody's planting a tree, putting in a sign, putting in a new sidewalk. They don't call Julie, which they're supposed to, and they go and they dig up and they correct the cable. With the ring architecture, you at least have a second connection coming the other way around the ring. So if it gets cut at the top of the ring, the bottom of the ring can still provide service while you get the other fiber fixed. That's not always a perfect plan. The rings have 216 strands in each one of them, which is a fair amount of fiber. And in some cases, we dedicate a strand to an anchor institution. This next slide gives you just a little overview of what's on ring 1. And there are literally dozens of different kinds of organizations. There's schools, there's libraries, there's senior living centers, there's basically public safety facilities. But they all come back to node 8 and node 9. And that goes over and over in all the rings. Now, ring 1 is a fairly heavily populated ring.
That's the one in the middle?
Yes, ring 1 is kind of North Champaign. Everything starts on campus and ends on campus, but ring 1 is the red one that goes up through North Champaign. We tried to keep the color scheme consistent throughout the project, not always with great success. But you've got this map in front of you, and then the list of the anchor institutions is on actually the back side of that. And if you look at some of those organizations, you'll see that there's some really big organizations, and there's kind of some small organizations. And we have a battered women's shelter in town. They're on there. That's a vulnerable population. Okay, when we went to build this fiber, just to give you a real quick overview of this, most of the fiber in the fiber of the home area goes up and down the street in the public right-of-way, or the city right-of-way, that's usually between the sidewalk and the street. If you've ever owned a home, you don't actually own that property. That belongs to the city. They can plant trees on there. If you plant a tree there, they don't like it, they can cut it down. It's really, literally the city's land. Your lot typically starts at the sidewalk. So the fiber infrastructure that goes up and down the street is in that area, and then there are spurs that run off to the home. We put a small handhold in between every 2 lots so that, this does. So this handhold here is going to serve this house here, and it's going to serve this house here. And you can actually see that from the ground level. This is actually those 2 homes. And so we actually brought fiber up in between here, and then we'll teed off to that way and teed into this house here. And that got repeated over and over and over and over. We only built fiber into the homes where people said they wanted service. But at any point spending money to do that if they weren't going to pay for the needed service. And of the roughly 4,800 homes we went by, ballpark 1,000 of them subscribed to service. We had very low rates because we knew most of our families were low income. And that was a little lower penetration than we wanted, but at least it was a good start. And a handhole may not be a term you're familiar with, but all a handhole is just a small manhole. You can't put your body in it, but you can get your hands down in it to do some work. It's enough to splice cable and pull cable through. Okay, one of the questions that get asked a lot is, why did we do fiber to the premise? Fiber is the only technology out there that is limitless. You can always put different electronics on the end of the fiber and make it go faster and get extra bandwidth through it. The fiber lasts 40, 50, 60 years. They don't know. It's only been around for 30 or so years, and there's a lot of fiber in the ground that got put in 30 years ago that's still working just fine. Some of the earlier fiber tended to cloud a little bit over the years. Every time it went through a freeze-thaw cycle, it would cloud up just a little bit, and then eventually it might go bad. But the fiber that's been built recently isn't susceptible to that the same way. And the fiber we bought literally came right off the press the day we put it in. So it's new fiber. It should last a very long time. People ask all the time, who's going to pay for all this? I mean, it's the federal government. Does the federal government have the money to pay for this? Well, no, probably not. But it's going to be our children and our grandchildren that are going to pay for this. And they're going to be the ones that benefit from this, because in 20, 30, 40 years, this fiber is still going to be providing services in Champaign-Urbana. So it seemed like it was a good solution. You know, you can do wireless more cheaply, but it's not as good, it's not as permanent. This was a permanent solution. One of the other decisions we made was to go with symmetric gigabit service. And again, that seems to be the way things are going. If you think about you as a content creator as opposed to just a consumer of the internet, having a good upstream path is important. If you need to send video, if you need to send movies, if you're just sending big data files, if you're backing up your files in the cloud someplace, having a good upstream path is important. In the early days of this, I spent a lot of time going to city council meetings and trying to sell the city councils on investing money. I ultimately was successful. But in the early days, we were going to do this as a 100 megabit network. That seemed like a reasonable speed at the time. And I'd go to city councils, and there'd always be somebody who said, why are you doing 100 megabits? Nobody needs 100 megabits. You're crazy. And yes, I'm crazy, but that's fine. And I will go away, and they funded it anyway. And then in 2010, Google Fiber came out and had a competition for cities around the country, saying they were going to go gigabit in some cities, and they invited cities to apply. Well, we were one of the cities that applied. But the next time I went to a city council meeting, and I was talking about doing 100 megabits, they go, you Luddite, how come you're only doing 100 megabits? Why aren't you doing a gigabit just like Google? And these are the same people that were beating me up for doing 100 megabits before. So Google really changed the whole discussion in our country about what is an adequate speed. Gigabit used to be thought of as kind of a luxury. Now it's kind of table stakes. Symmetric connections we think are important. What we offered originally were symmetric. What I think Levi is going to talk to you about is going to be almost symmetric. What you get from the cable company and the telephone companies today is very asymmetric. Your downstream is reasonable, your upstream is pitiful. And you probably all experienced that. One of the questions I got asked a lot when I was still working for the university was, why was I spending so much of my time on this community project? And it was really self-serving to some degree for the university. The university grew its network very organically. We didn't have fiber 30 years ago. We just had 250 buildings. And when the first fiber went in, it connected 2 buildings. And then there were 3 buildings. And then there was a little hub, and maybe 6 buildings were connected. And it kind of grew like a spider web. But a good network is ringed. A good network has multiple paths to places. And a lot of the campus that's been taken care of, but a lot of the campus, you're single-threaded. If a backhoe gets lucky on 4th Street, the whole south side of campus could go dark, at least before we started this. And that takes a while to fix. And think of all the students, all the business, all the classes that could not survive without the internet, or phones for that matter, because it was all in the same conduits. So one of the reasons we did this is when we built these rings, is that they reinforce, the university has fiber on these rings, and they give second paths to the southern part of campus. The research park used to be on a single fiber cable. The NCSA supercomputer for a while was on a single fiber cable. and it doesn't take much to take them offline, which would be really sad. So part of it was just to reinforce the campus network and to have additional fiber connectivity available. A lot of it was to get to leased offices. The university constantly is moving people around. Although we're renovating a building, I think the Natural History Building right now is being renovated. Where are all those people? Well, they're often private offices around town where they can rent space for the short term. Well, again, as soon as you take them off campus, they're going into the hinterlands or the wilderness in terms of internet connectivity. So at any point in time, the university spends a fair degree of money providing connectivity through private companies to these other buildings so they can get back to campus. We now have our own fiber into most of the buildings that we tend to lease over time. The university purchasing office is way down on South Neal Street now. It's totally off campus. Well, you can't, there's enough business going through, we had to build fiber into them as well. So it helped just the university do its business. I talked before about blended learning. That's really the big driver as far as I'm concerned, is that we need to get to a point where every student has got equal access to the internet and equal access to the university's resources, just so you can do your homework. And in an economic development sort of sense, it's having a fiber network in town, having a gigabit fiber network in town that is ubiquitous. It helps attract faculty and staff. What does Champaign-Urbana have outside of Kate and Abdul and some other people? We don't have any mountains, we don't have any water, our weather's not all that wonderful, but we can have the best network in the country, and that's something we can control. So in terms of the kind of faculty we'd like to get here, that's a feature that I think they're going to think is important. We have the university and local employers have trouble with trailing spouses. It's not a problem, but if the university wants to hire a woman and her husband's got a really good job where he is, well, maybe he can keep this job where he is because he can telecommute from here because he's got good fiber connectivity from his home. So having a good fiber network solves a fair number of problems at the university, and it helps just improve the quality of life of what we have. UCTV is an open access network. One of the problems with Comcast, AT&T, Mediacom, any of the other providers is because they own the cable into your house, they also control all the content you have access to. If you don't like their service, well, you can't get anybody else's services over that. UCTV is set up in such a way that if I'm the provider and I'm doing a bad job, you can go online, you can pick a different provider, you can pick a different phone company, you can pick a different cable company. Now, those don't all exist in multitudes now, but it's set up to allow that sort of thing to happen. At least that was the original plan. There are 4 or 5 different providers using UCTV fiber now, and there may be more. Well, ITV3 will be the major one when the time comes. So, quick thing on where we are today. We finally closed out the grant in May. There were a little over 1,250 locations that were connected at one time or the other with fiber. Some of those were anchor institutions. About 80 were businesses, and the rest were residences. Now, some of those people have moved, and some of those original connections we put in are now just sitting there in dark because whoever moved in didn't want the service or for one reason or another. UCTV started as an intergovernmental consortium between the 2 cities and the university. It has now evolved into a not-for-profit corporation. The 2 cities and the university still appoint the members of the board of that not-for-profit corporation, so they have some say in terms of how it goes, but it's more of an indirect route. And that has allowed us to, quite honestly, go out and find a private partner. As an intergovernmental consortium, we were subject to the Open Meetings Act and FOIA, and basically we had to telegraph everything we did to all our competitors. Comcast would send people to our meetings, and because they were open meetings, they'd know exactly what we were up to. And Comcast and AT&T are fairly aggressive competitors, and we're just a little tiny organization. We didn't need to give them any more help than necessary. So by becoming a not-for-profit, we can actually, the board of directors, which I'm not on, can actually have closed-door meetings and create strategies and make long-term plans, and they could also negotiate with a private partner. And lo and behold, we went out to try and find a private partner, and we looked for another part of 2 years. And as Levi will tell you, we got together with them in November of this last year. This hasn't even been a year yet, has it? Coming right up on it.
It's about a year ago.
Yeah. I remember the phone call. And in May of this year, we had an announcement out at the research park of an agreement where ITV3 was going to come in and take over the operations of what we had already built, but also aggressively go out and market their services and expand the fiber throughout the rest of the community. This is some of the people who spoke. That both mayors were there. A gentleman named Blair Levin, who actually wrote the National Broadband Plan for the FCC, was on hand. The CIO from the university, Paul Hickson, attended, and Keith Hoogland, who's head of the president of ITV3. And then, of course, Levi was there. So I'm going to turn it over to Levi. You got to figure out how to get your...
Are you good on the screen there? Or on the keyboard there?
Yes, it's up, and just if you go to the iPad, if you go to Window, and just go to ITV3, and then View Full.
All right, you're up. I'm up. So,
You don't have to talk as fast as
I might have to.
time to cover.
I'm notoriously long-winded, so I'll try and do my best. But first I want to start and talk a little bit about ITV3 and our parent organization, Family Video. And to do that, I'm going to start out by talking about myself. I'm from a small town in southwest Iowa. And back in about 1946 to 48, an engineer moved a line on a map 1 mile. And when he did that, or she did that, they killed our town. We just didn't realize it for 2 generations. By the time I graduated from high school, what was once a thriving community, multiple grocery stores, multiple businesses, a nice community that happened to be on Highway 6, which before the interstate was the lifeblood of the economy going through central Iowa. In moving that line is where they put the interstate. That was the lifeblood of our community. And like I said, we didn't realize it at the time, and so nobody did anything about it. They didn't redevelop new subdivisions out by the interstate or put a gas station out there. Instead, it was just a little sign that said, "Get off here and come to our historic town." Highway 6 was the lifeblood of the local economy in my town. When we think about the lifeblood of the economy for towns across America and across the world, really, moving into the future, that's no longer the highways. Our highway of commerce moving in the future is the internet. It's connectivity. It's how we communicate. ITV3's parent organization is Family Video. Family Video is a video store, obviously, but we're actually a real estate organization that uses video to pay for our real estate. And our real estate is concentrated across the Midwest in towns like Champaign and Urbana. We've been here in the Champaign-Urbana area since the late 80s. We've been doing business. We've been doing business since 1946 in central Illinois, and as a video store since the late 70s. But what we saw a couple of years ago, and when I say that, maybe about 2008 or so, is we saw kind of the haves and have-nots on a national level being decided by the major players. The major players being AT&T and Verizon. Google wasn't along yet with their project, but so it was mainly Verizon with their Fios product, AT&T with their Uber's product. They were going out there and deciding which communities were worthy of getting upgraded to fiber. And they weren't choosing communities like Champaign-Urbana. They weren't choosing communities like Peoria, where we started at. They were choosing Chicago. They were choosing New York, Boston, places like that, called Tier 1 cities. Well, at Family Video, the Hoagland family who owns us, we're a family-owned company, had the vision to look at that and go, you know what, we see an opportunity here. These are underserved markets. And we think that if people in central Illinois, we think if business owners and if individuals who've got access to fiber optic speeds that are out in Silicon Valley or available in Boston research labs, we think that the businesses and the entrepreneurs and the citizens of towns like this in central Illinois are going to be every bit as competitive on an international level as these other communities that were considered the Tier 1 communities. So we set out to start a fiber to the home network. Going back in time, though, I think that slide just gives you a little bit about the Hoagland family. Like I said, it started in 1946 by Clarence Hoagland. In about the late 70s, Charlie Hoagland started Family Video, and that grew into what we have today, which is a real estate organization. I think we've got approaching 800 stores. We really have multiple businesses. We've got a pizza business now, 24-state but a lot of things that are centered around reinforcing our real estate. ITV3, although it's not in the physical real estate, the video store, we see it as strengthening the local economies, which reinforces the value of our real estate portfolio within those areas. So our goal is not just to bring connectivity to everybody in Champaign and Urbana, but to create economic conditions that are going to bring new technology companies to the area to make this a thriving economy well into the future. So ITV3, what we're doing is we're creating 100% fiber to the home network. So there's a couple of technologies that are out there. There's fiber to the node, which is what UVerse is, and then we have fiber to the home, or fiber to the premise, which is what UCB's vision was. The node will get you kind of close to the home, but then you're using copper to get all the way to the home. The problem with that being that copper loses information pretty quickly compared to fiber, and so you can't get the same speeds out of copper that you can get out of fiber. The advantage for the companies that chose fiber to the node is it's not as expensive to deploy, so they save money and they can get a reasonable increase in their speeds over just straight copper, but it's still not the ideal technology. That's what AT&T chose to deploy. And then you've got Fios, which was deployed by Verizon. That's a fiber to the premise network, and they felt that investing in the infrastructure was the right way to go, but they just didn't think it was for everybody. So that's where we came along and we saw the market opportunity, and we thought if we can come in and put in a fiber to the home, fiber to the business, all the way into, we don't actually go just on the outside, we actually come into the premise with the fiber, put the equipment inside of either business or home. We knew that we'd have the best technology available. That doesn't mean somebody can't tie us. Somebody can come along and they can put in fiber and they can compete with us and have the same technical ability. So our real market opportunity, we thought, wasn't just the technology, it was the customer service. Because, if you think about it, go out and talk to 10 people and ask them, do you love your cable company? Do you love your phone company? How many say, yeah? We're Americans, and being in this country, we kind of don't like things being force-fed to us, right? And when you think about it, your cable and your telephone, home telephone choices are one of the few things where you don't really have a choice in the majority of American cities. And this environment created eventually really bad customer service and a feeling as a customer where, I don't know about you, but myself, I always felt like I didn't really have any power against the cable company or against the phone company. And if I wanted to get something out of her, I wasn't going to get what I wanted. So we thought that our real opportunity was to bring our philosophies and culture of customer service from the video stores, what we've learned from over 35 years of retailing and how to treat people. We brought that mentality into the telecom business and cable business and treated people like our friends and neighbors and knew coming in that people were going to have a choice. The very fact that we're in a market means that our customers have a choice, so we have to compete for their business every day. We thought that we'd be better positioned to do that than companies that aren't used to having to compete for your business. A little bit of our company, we're new to Champaign-Urbana. We're not new to Central Illinois. We started out in the Peoria area, in Pekin, Morton, East Peoria. We've spent a little bit over $35 million upgrading community infrastructure to date throughout that area before we got together with UCB, and currently service a little over 9,000 customers throughout Central Illinois. That makes us one of the largest, we believe we're the largest fiber to the home company in Central Illinois. Talk a little bit about our partnership with UCB. It was about November of last year that we were actually, this is kind of odd, funny story. I was buying a building from Rails, reaching across Illinois library system. Okay, they're our tenant now. We bought the building from them, then they leased back. But if you ever get to go to that facility, you'll also visit our corporate home office. Through that process and talking to the bank that was going to be doing the mortgage on our home office, they said, "Oh, you're in fiber optics now." Mainly by real estate for video stores. We know some folks down in Champaign you might be interested in talking to. They've got this fiber optic thing, and I don't know, I think that they're trying to find somebody to come and run it. And so they got us in contact with a local company who in turn got Mike on the phone with me about a year ago. And Mike is very, very passionate about this project, and I'm very passionate about what we do. And I think we probably got a little bit too excited for our first call, and had plans laid out many years into the future by the end of it. But what came about from that was a meeting, I think in late November, between UCB board or early December, whatever that was, and Keith Over and myself and a couple other executives with Family Video. We got together and really we realized that on matters of philosophy, on matters of culture, on our vision for what we want to do we were just lockstep all the way. There were some little differences in how to implement it, but really, I think it was probably one of the more cordial negotiating processes that I've ever been a part of, and it was very enjoyable. But I think it's because we both kind of came out of the same place and wanting to do the same thing and feeling the same way about other larger companies not wanting to invest in what we think is a great community. So that was in November. We made the public announcement in May, which takes a long time. It's a really long time. There's a lot of details to work out. We released our online neighborhood maps in July of 2014. It's just a line there. You have no idea how hard it was to engineer 40-some thousand premises in 2 months, 2.5 months, to be able to release what we think is the first of its kind map in the United States that truly empowers the community to go out and decide where we build. That gives you information on where your house is, how many people need to sign up for us to come and build. One of the advantages of the network that Mikey designed at UCB had was that they built these rings. These rings really reached out into the community in a way that allows us to jump off of the ring and build individual neighborhoods based upon where people want to get the service. We took over operations from the university in August. The university staff actually was operating the UCB network for the last couple of years, and they did an excellent job, and they came in and, you think fiber optic network in Peoria, fiber optic network in Champaign, it's got to be all the same, right? No. Fiber to the home is really the wild, wild west of technology businesses. Nobody's doing everything precisely the same. There are standards, but how people apply them are different across the board. And so the university staff helping us to understand some of the equipment that was down here was critical, and we took over operations from them in August. We took over locating in September. If you've been about town and you've seen one of our vans here recently, it's because we took over locating. We're starting to take over a lot of the maintenance, and you'll see more and more of those vans, and that's just the people that go out there when you're ready to dig and you call Julie or anybody does. We've got to go out there and show them where the lines are so that you don't put a shovel or a backhoe through our network and take down a bunch of people's internet. And our sales drive, we just started in September, really, and you go, wow, May to September, why didn't you start really selling, first? One of the lessons that we learned going back to the early days in Keegan in Peoria is you don't want to overhype something like this, because it really is one of those things where people think it's too good to be true. What do you mean I'm going to have choice? I'm going to be able to choose. I won't have to deal with in that area of Comcast. I won't have to deal with CenturyLink or AT&T. Okay, why aren't you guys here now? And so we started out with this why campaign, and then quickly realized that if we weren't available right away, it created some resentment. So from that, we've kind of honed in on this approach of using grassroots. What we find is usually, there are some very passionate people out there that are willing to get the neighbors involved, and then we see these areas in the community where there's a lot of interest. And that's important to understand about being a competitive provider. We can't just go out there and build the whole community and wait for everybody to come. We need the community's involvement, and so the parameter that we've set is wherever there's 50% of these neighborhoods. We split these neighborhoods into groups of 175 to 350 homes. That's because of the technology that we use. We use a technology called GPON. It makes it affordable to deliver the service to your home. It allows us to lower the cost of deployment. But it also means that the most efficient way to deploy it is in groups of 350 or 175 homes or businesses at a time. So what we did is we got the town into these groups, and a lot of people go, well, why didn't you include me in that neighborhood? That's really more of my neighborhood. It's kind of dictated by where the rings are, how much fiber is available, and can we move them a little bit? Yeah. Will we move them if it means that we're going to get an area to 50%? Yeah, we're going to do everything we can, because we want to build as much of the community as possible. We just want to make sure that the actual customers are there, so we don't go out and spend $50 million plus and go bankrupt, which is what some other companies that have gotten a little bit too far ahead of themselves have really run into trouble with. So we base where we build on where people sign up. Another question that I get asked is, well, 50%, is that realistic? I mentioned we've got 9,000 customers in another area, and I can tell you that 50% is definitely realistic. And when you go back to that question, think about, if you go out and poll 10 of your friends and say how many of you are happy with your cable provider or your internet provider, how many of them are going to say, is it going to be more than 50% go, oh yeah, I'm great. Oh yeah, they give me a great value. No, not so much. So We come in, obviously we've got a better, we feel, technology and service, and we're going to be providing gigabit speed. Champaign-Urbana is the first community that we're going to be providing full gigabit speed on the download. And it's going to be about 200 meg on the upload. We use synchronous, asynchronous speeds. The reason why we do that is that GPON technology that I mentioned before. We feel pretty strongly that by the time that 200 meg upload is going to be an issue, there's already second and third generation, and actually GPON is already, third generation? And so there's fourth and fifth and sixth generation technologies coming along that will allow us to actually put 10 gigabits down in your home someday, and maybe that's 2 gigabits up. But in any case, what we do is, in our philosophy on what you use, is we monitor the network as a whole, and we monitor the neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that whatever you're getting, you're getting. And so we monitor the back end of things so that if our customers ever get close to using what we have available, we just get more. As Mike mentioned, that's the advantage of fiber is just run some more electronics, or we get more bandwidth, and we take it from. I remember when I started, we had 142 customers, and we weren't even using 100 megs of bandwidth. And now we've scaled that all the way up to 20 gigs that we have, which is a tremendous growth, right? We're getting ready to do that thread in some of these slides. Getting losses, so we're direction. Where are we at today on this network? Currently, there's 900 customers on the the Champaign-Urbana network. Fiber is built out to over 4,000 homes and businesses and community anchor institutions. We're installing new access equipment and technology. And so new, it's different. The equipment that's in place today is going to stay in place and going to continue to serve the neighborhoods that were built. We're going to add some additional equipment, and I think the grant that UCB built on was based on servicing 4,800 homes. Well, you're going to use different equipment if you're planning on servicing 50,000, right? And we've got to build a network for 50,000, not 4,900. So, we could probably limp along on what's here and grow a little bit at a time, but that's eventually going to mean a headache for some of our customers. So we made the decision that we're going to do a full-blown upgrade to the market right away up front and make this market capable of supporting 50,000 plus customers right away. So that's part of that is upgrading back onto the internet. We're hiring local employees. It's important to make note of that if you know anybody looking for a job, or if you have a hankering and a passion for getting the word out about fiber optics and connectivity. We'd love to talk to you. We're hiring. We need people to get the word out for us. We're looking for really anything. We're hiring local employees right now. Our canvassing team, early results are since September, we are getting 50% of the people that we're talking to. The hard part's getting enough people to talk to. Not everybody's all at home. Same thing. Talk about extending the network. I already mentioned we base where we build off of where people are signing up. That model, using a neighborhood model concept that people use first, but we won't be the last. But it's a great model because what it really does, and what our neighborhood model does, is it empowers the community to decide who does get broadband. And a lot of times people ask me, well, doesn't that just mean you guys are just going to go where all the rich people are? No, if you look at our network that we have throughout the greater Peoria area, and this is one of the interesting things, is economics and demographics, how much money you make and what your educational level definitely does have an impact on our take rate. But there's an odd thing, which is that we find that in many of the lower income communities, there's more organization, specifically through the churches and some of the social organizations. And so the word actually gets out faster and somewhat stronger in some of those areas that would be less likely, you would think, from an income level to get the word out. Now that doesn't mean that everybody, if the word gets to them, they go, yeah, I'd love to have fiber optics, but I don't have a computer. That's still a problem, and I think that that's one of the things that this class is going to be talking about, and we're passionate about doing as well. But one of the things that we also do is we focus our canvassers. So we look for hotspots in the community. So right now, our canvassing team is working on a hotspot. It was the area of Urbana that had the most signups, the most grassroots signups. We never had to do anything, and they just got the most people signed up. It also happens to be a pretty heavily populated area by university staff. No surprise, right? High education level there. and a lot of awareness about the project. So, yes. Yeah, and so, and we think it's going to end up, and we're hoping to get it built this year. But, you know, I think they got like 20% penetration, and we really hadn't done a lot of marketing at that time, but we took our team, put it over there, and we're going to help them to get the rest of their neighborhood up to 50%. That's kind of what our model is. Our experience has been wide area marketing generation. This is a much bigger word-of-mouth business. We're one of the fastest growing fiber-to-the-home companies throughout the Midwest, and I can't remember the last time I took out an ad. The vast majority of our customers are customers because their friends and family have told them about us. You know, they see our vans and they go, "Oh, you're finally here." We send people out to talk to them. "Oh, this is great, you're finally here." We're involved with their schools. They see us, you know, working with their schools and other community organizations to help out and help people with access issues. And that's primarily how we get our customers. We also use the family videos. We do use some targeted mailing, and we're using yard signs here and changing their van, which we're really excited about because we can't do that in every community, but we're trying to create kind of this sea of orange where everywhere you go, you're seeing the interest that's out there. I did want to, seeing as how, you know, the overall theme of this series, I want to talk about the digital divide in ITV3, kind of how we feel about it. And, you know, if you don't have a need for the internet, if you haven't conquered the digital divide, then why are you going to get our service, right? And so for us, it's imperative for the value of our service and our network that we conquer the digital divide. You know, if everybody has a need for a computer, we feel pretty good about the prospects of our network because we think we're going to have the best value and the best product to be able to get. So we're on board. We're on board both financially and through other creative resources. I can't talk about exactly how much, but we are a significant contributor to the Community Benefit Fund that UCB is administering, not just right now, but into the future. Our estimated build out of this community is about $50 million, a little over $50 million. Okay? It's a pretty big investment in the Champaign-Urbana community, and we see that as an investment that also the community is making in us by giving the service. One of the things that we're excited about doing here that we have not done in the past, because there is this InfoCity, you know, in the interest here to really tackle digital divide, is we're going to dedicate a channel on our TV network to digital divide training and education, and we're going to do that at no cost and provide access to our TV network, which we hope to eventually have here, and so that we can get the word out even more. I mentioned financial support for the Community Benefit Fund, and then one of the other things, you know, we're a family-owned company. We're a Midwest company. You know, I'm the vice president of the company. I work with the president, who is the, you know, basically runs Family Video, runs all of our real estate, runs everything, you know, and I run this company for the Homeland family. We're real, we're accessible, and we are part of the communities that we serve. You know, we're reflective of the communities that we serve. We believe in being a part of them. We're not in, you know, some huge mega tower in Philadelphia or Dallas or wherever, and not accessible and only paying token, you know, respect to the community and talking about being a good community member. We really want to walk the walk, and so we've got an area market manager here. His name's Trevor Price. And Trevor, you know, he's getting involved with various community organizations. I'm trying to get involved with them so that we can get the word out and you know, make this add value by bringing everybody into the fold, getting everybody interested, not just in fiber optics, but in understanding what having a fiber optic network available to 100% of the community can mean. When you think about, if you're, you know, all of you, you know, you're young right now and getting ready to graduate at some point, and some of you are going to start businesses in someday. And you think about, where do you want to live? Where do you want to start a business? Well, if I'm starting a business, I want to live someplace where I can have a high quality of life. When you think about high quality of life, it's interesting. I attended a seminar this summer, and it was talking about the generational differences between my generation. I'm too old, but evidently pollsters seem to think I'm old. But, you know, it was talking about dining. You know, what's the most important thing for you in a dining experience? And people my age, I'm a little bit over 40 right now, you know, it's the quality of the food, the ambiance, accessibility, how close to my home, right? And there's this line at about 30 years old. It was like, if you're under 30, you're hit, right? You know? What's important to you in your dining experience? Open Wi-Fi, number one.
Yeah, that's it.
Open Wi-Fi was number one. And you know, you think about that, and you expand that, you extrapolate it to a community level. What's going to be the most important thing for this generation, you know, that's coming up through this next generation of entrepreneurs when they're thinking about where am I going to go and start a business? You know, back in, you know, 100 years ago, it was all about rivers, roads, and resources. Nowadays, it's still going to a certain extent, be about the roads got to have its own there, I guess, but the real road is the internet, and the resources are the people. And you think about Champaign-Urbana, you think about the university programs, you think about the educational level of the community as a whole. If we can make this a gigabit city and have the resources of the university, the resources of all the students that are graduating and love this now and stay there and do something good, we think we put that together and we're going to be every bit as competitive as any city in not just the nation, but any city in the world. So that's what we're looking forward to. I appreciate that.
We don't have another question, but I have one while you all are thinking about the next one. The uniqueness of UCB was partly that it was fiber rings and fiber to the home. It's partly that we went so deep with the anchor institutions. You could explain, you mentioned it, but I don't know if you mentioned it, let's go back to it for a second. Tell people what the community response was, because that is also unique of UCB. And you mentioned how ITV3 was asked money on to support the community on
The two grants that I talked about that weren't funded, the public computing centers and the sustainable broadband adoption, they did things, or they proposed to do things that this community needed. And when we didn't get federal funding for that, the UCB board in the very early days said we need to set aside some of the revenue we get from our system to help make some of those things happen. Now, it was a little bit of a conundrum because most of our customers were pretty low-income people to begin with, so we couldn't charge them an extra $5 a piece to fund that. So we put aside a modest amount of money to be able to do that. And when we started our negotiations with ITV3, one of the things we said to them was, we'd like you to dedicate some money to help expanding the digital divide, promote digital inclusion, not whatever phrase you want to use, and they readily agreed. It wasn't like they had to twist their arms or anything. So that's a fund that the UCB board will be administering going forward, and those have people that are appointed by both the cities and the university. The chancellor actually makes the university appointments. And they will, I don't know if they exactly figured out what it's going to look like. At one point there was maybe going to be mini grants to organizations that had specific projects, or maybe they're just going to fund one big organization that does a bigger project. But nonetheless, there will be funds to do those kind of above ground, those people facilitated things. I was all about the infrastructure. You know, I don't get along with people. I just like technology. But that's a big part of the project. And then again, that was somewhat unique in terms of the federal projects that we were a part of. There were like 180 federal projects, and we were just one of those. And some of them were really big, some of them were kind of small. We were kind of a medium size.
I think it's important for you all to be aware of these things because you all may not be headed into business because this is not typically a business school. But you're headed into places where you will set policy, like they said on these boards that Mike was referring to. And it's this kind of innovation that really prepares a community to innovate in the ways that you're talking about. So there's lots of ways to see innovation, but all we want to see is one of the ways we're doing it. Other questions or thoughts for our speaker?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So we talked a lot about, you guys talked a lot about having broadband be available to everyone, but what about those families that maybe purchasing a desktop computer or a way to get the internet is not feasible? Are there like other organizations that are kind of like partnering up to you guys to help, you know, supplement that or kind of help bridge that gap between families that think broadband would be really important, maybe they have kids and things like that, but they don't have access to getting a desktop computer or having that set up?
that's one of the things that the Community Benefit Fund will hopefully address, either directly or indirectly. But again, UC2B started where we've already built fiber. We're probably 8 or 9 of the lowest income areas of town. If AT&T was going to come here and do this, they would have started with my neighborhood, which is a little bit nicer, and they would get to those that last. We've already got those built. There was already fiber in the street there. One of the statistics is low-income families tend to spend a disproportionate amount of their income on home entertainment. If you think about it, they can't afford to go out, so they'll have a satellite dish, or they'll have a big TV, or they'll have an expensive cable connection. If and when my neighborhood qualifies for ITV service, my cable bill will be cut in half, and it would be the same thing for a low-income family. It would make economic sense for them, rather than spending $150 on cable, to spend $70 or $80 with ITV3. That's money in their pocket. So part of what we've done is we've enabled and we've encouraged a provider that has an aggressive thought about pricing and also providing real value.
And from the ITV3 perspective there, I know there's a local organization that does recycle computers and tries to get them out. And so I think, in thinking about how we can work with them separate from the Community Benefit Fund is we anticipate having thousands of customers that have disposable income and get rid of old desktops. And when I say get rid of them, they're just pitching because they don't see any value in them. Well, if we can get information in their hands about good things that they can do with them, not just there, but remember we've got 9,000 customers back in the Peoria area already, and that's always growing. I love that program. I love what's being done here locally, and love to see us help to exchange and get the word out there.
That was last week's lecture, right? And you all weren't there, but last week's lectures and these guys met. So just the thing you're talking about.
And the paradigm is changing. This is more powerful than the first 3 computers I owned. And I still can't do everything on my phone that I can do on my computer, but for a lot of people, this is the internet access device of choice. Now, if you've got Wi-Fi in your home, this becomes much more useful than trying to get it over cellular, because AT&T is going to bill you for everything you do over your data caps and so forth. This is about making the internet widely available, not a scarce resource, an abundant resource. Whereas the existing commercial providers want it to be a scarce resource so they can put a meter on it and charge it.
Cool. Thank you for this whirlwind tour.